Good morning. Well, I was born into Catholicism, primarily because my parents divorced when I was 5, and my dad, whom I lived with, remarried when I was 8. It didn't stick. Prior to the arrival of a Methodist stepmother, my dad actually used to drop my sister and me off at the door of the church for Mass on Sunday mornings and return an hour later to pick us up. Apparently, even though he felt no longer welcome, he wanted a better outcome for us. But Catholicism also didn't stick because I was what my father termed a strong-minded person. I attended catechism and made my first communion before we left the Catholic Church for good. But even at the age of 7, I got in trouble for asking too many questions and questioning the answers. For instance, I wanted to be an altar boy, but that was out of the question. I particularly took issue with the church's attitude and treatment of females. I thought blaming Eve for the ejection from the garden totally unfair. I couldn't understand or accept the idea of original sin. How could babies be born with sin? It made no sense. And speaking of sins, there were just too darn many of them. At confession, at the age of 7, I used to make up extra sins just to be on the safe side. Because it seemed like not confessing your sins, even the ones you didn't know you committed, was also a sin. I spent my teens as a Methodist, which seemed a better fit. Less harping on sin. Went to silent Quaker meetings for a while when I was in college, joined a consciousness-raising group of feminists, participated in sensitivity groups and various psychological programs for personal growth. I was really into the 60s. I was exposed to UUs when my husband was hired by a group of UU parents to start a free school. Remember those? We even lived in the parsonage because this particular church was too small to have a minister. After I was divorced, I was unchurched for about 20 years. During that time, I knew I had growing to do, and I was searching for something to depend on, a mentor to learn from who was farther along the path than I was. I was gravely disappointed a few times by fallen idols. My daughter was born when I was 38. Being a single parent was like living the tale of two cities. It was the best of times and the worst of times. I realized that my daughter needed a village, but I also needed a village. I wanted to find a church that would provide this village for me and chose a local congregational church. As luck would have it, the Sunday I attended, the minister talked about sin and fundraising. Coincidentally, my neighbor was trying out the local UU church. After discussing our relative experiences, she admitted she was missing the rituals and familiar hymns, and I had reacted to the traditional Protestant approach and was looking for something different. So we switched churches and happily settled into our new church communities. That was over 30 years ago. I joined the choir. I participated in RE. I joined the women's group and attended the yearly women's retreat held on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. UUism fit me like a glove. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, check. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations? Check. Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations? Big check. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning? Check. The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process? Check. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all? Check. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Check. I was able, in this community, and encouraged to pursue my own spiritual growth, and no one was judging my efforts. I would probably still be there today, but I lost my job during a time when most companies were downsizing. And after being out of work for 6 months, I realized I had to job search outside of Maine. The first interview I got was in Memphis, Tennessee. Someone asked me, "What kind of food do you like?" I said, "Oh, Italian, Chinese, New Age, this, that." The next thing, I listed about 6 different kinds of food, and he said, "How do you feel about barbecue?" It's not on the top of my list. I checked into the UUA website and found 3 congregations in Memphis, so that was encouraging. And when I made my plans to fly to Memphis for an interview, I asked to be there over the weekend. And I set up plans to meet with a real estate agent and to go to the closest UU church. The interview went well, real estate prices were low, and the UU church felt like home from the moment I walked in the door. I accepted the job and moved halfway across the country. I was at my first UU church in Maine for 8 years, and my second UU church in Memphis for almost 20. The church in Memphis had an established pagan group, which I occasionally participated in. Frankly, I never really felt totally comfortable with paganism, but what I did relate to was the idea of strong spiritual connection to nature and the more equitable balance of male and female energy. In Memphis, I met a woman from the Atlanta area who'd been involved in UU Women's Spirit, a feminist group that had been meeting at the Mountain Learning and Retreat Center in Highlands, North Carolina for many years. Actually, at this point, it's over 30 years. It was run by volunteers who presented 2 retreats a year that focused on the feminine divine. I started to attend their retreats with a friend and eventually became involved in the presentation of worship services and served on their board. Women's Spirit was unlike any organization I had ever known. Very open, welcoming, and egalitarian. It was run by consensus with a great deal of respect, caring, and a big sense of humor. I felt a huge feeling of unconditional positive regard there. Imagine that, unconditional positive regard. Now, it seems to me that that's very much like what we're talking about when we mention beloved community. No matter who you are, no matter what your difference is, you are welcome and you are greeted with respect. Unconditional positive regard, and despite some slight issues with the programming, I was an avid attendee for years and will probably resume since COVID isolation days are over. The main issue is I don't really believe in goddesses any more than I believe in gods, but I do believe that the impact of a Judeo-Christian father god has had a negative impact on women over thousands of years and continues today. I'm very uncomfortable with the legacy of women as second-class citizens. The hitch for me is the image of an old white guy with a long beard sitting on a heavenly throne. The whole idea of us being made in his image doesn't sit well with me. I think that we made him in our image to feel more secure in our tenuous connection to life and death on this earth. Despite all my lifetime of experiences, there is a huge chunk of me that believes that I am intelligent, capable, good-hearted, and worthy of respect. I'm still working on the small part, and it gets smaller as time goes by, that feels inadequate and imperfect. I hear that taint of second-class citizenship in other Protestant liturgy and see it in practice in our churches and our culture. I even saw it when I attended my first GA in 2013. It was amazing to be among thousands of people who had the same values, but I noticed that there was also a residue of patriarchy. Seemed like there was still an old white guy in charge, pulling the strings. I even wrote a poem about it while I was there that I read at an open mic workshop. It's called "Where is the Goddess?" Among all these lords and he's and hims, where is she? Can it have escaped your attention that without the she, he would have perished by now? Can it have escaped your consideration that she might have been here first? I know, chicken and egg. Maybe we'll never know who came first, but can't we at least stop giving him top billing and burying her in the footnotes? I wrote that 10 years ago. One only has to listen to the news these days to know that there is a large segment of our population that believe the good old days means that there's a little woman waiting at the door in heels and an apron with a meatloaf right out of the oven when her man comes home. Now, I like meatloaf as much as the next person raised in the 50s, but I will not shrink back to that little woman's size in order to satisfy someone else's fantasies. One of the reasons I feel comfortable as a UU is that I feel I can be my full self here, and that I'm not expected to fit into a predetermined role. I've been here at UUC for 6 years, and I'm planning on staying put. Obviously, there's still work to be done, but I feel that the UUA's recent push for radical welcoming is going to carry us towards my goal of experiencing unconditional positive regard and a vibrant search for meaning. And in light of what we are discovering with the aid of Hubble and Webb telescopes, I think everyone should be re-examining their beliefs about a finite deity watching over a few million earthlings on a random blue planet. Fortunately, re-examining your personal beliefs is not only allowed but encouraged here. So here I am. Firstly, a feminist, then a humanist, then an agnostic, all encompassed in UU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Anna Soledad Vaquer's UU journey has been linked to the LGBT community. She will share her intertwined spiritual path, which she describes as de colores, full of colors. Soledad?
Buenos días. My UU journey, it is full of colors. And I will tell you how bland it was and how colorful it became. I was raised by a mother who decided at the age of 30 to become a very fanatic Jehovah's Witness. And by that I mean that this community brought her some sort of comfort because she had a very painful past and mental illness, bipolar. And apparently this particular faith offered her a place for her to really anchor herself. It was a community that it was very isolated, very controlling. I, of course, did not fit in it. I am a very friendly person, and I love hugs. And everyone here has been a victim of my embraces. So as soon as they proposed, particularly my mother, that I become a Jehovah's Witness missionary at the age of 15, I managed to escape. I did run away from home, and I swore not to ever look at any organized religion. 2 years after departing my home, I found myself in a very peculiar place, in the office of a social worker. I was expecting a child. It was out of wedlock, and I was going to be interviewed to be at an adolescent's home for mothers, expectant mothers. And the social worker who was with me said, the home that I was going to be interviewed may not, we'll have a place within 2 weeks. And so she said, but the women want to interview you. As I was being interviewed, and the social worker was translating for me, I did say to them that I understand that I may not be able to come into the home, but with my heart in their hands, I thanked them. And they loved that expression. So they went into a corner and told me to wait. And when they were doing a little shot, my social worker said to me, you know, they're lesbians. And I said, oh, I love that country. Thinking, of course, they were from Lebanon. And she was a bit puzzled, but we just played along. And they came and they said to me, would you be willing to stay in our office? We have a sofa bed, and you can stay there. And as soon as there's a vacancy in the rooms, you can come in. And I said, of course. So the following day at noon, I show up for lunch. I came in with my baggage, and my social workers left, and I sat, and there were other adolescent women expecting, and one of them was Spanish speaking. And one of the ladies that managed the home, this couple that managed the home, as you have a choice to either clean the dishes or set up the table or clean up the dust and vacuum, or go into the roof and learn a little bit how to repair a roof and how to do some plumbing. I said, I want to go into the roof. He said, can you get into the roof? Yes, you can. I've never seen a woman on a roof. So I was there. And then the woman sitting next to me, and she was also translating, she said, you know that they're lesbians? And I said, I love that country. And she burst out laughing. And I could not understand, so of course I was told what they were. And I went ahead and I said, well, okay. You know, I come from a Jehovah's Witness background, and they never told me anything about that, so I just went along. 10 years fold into this country. And prior to that, please forgive me, that woman that let me climb the roof and fix the plumbing, they both became very dear friends of mine. They told me how to read a map, because I didn't know geographically where I was. They told me how to take buses, and most incredibly, they helped me get my GED. I entered that home when I was in January, and by June I had my GED. It was thanks to them, to the woman from Lebanon. So I was so grateful, because 10 years fold, I found myself moving into San Francisco to a new sales job, and I was being interviewed by the landlord. I had this beautiful place overlooking Alcatraz. It was open by Lombard Street, the crookedest street in the world. And that apartment complex faced Alcatraz, very expensive. At that time, $800. And so I said, I know how to repair a roof and how to do plumbing, so if you cut me a little bit on the rent when you go on vacation, I'd be happy to do that. And he said, well, of course, I'll let the owner know. 2 days later, they called me and they said, the owner said, are you the lady who can fix roofs and do plumbing? He said, yes. And said, well, can you do it full time? He said, no, I can't. I'm doing a job full time already. And he said, well, the gentleman that interviewed you, the manager, just had a heart attack. So if you can do it for a little while, yeah. I said, fine, no problem. I'll do it. I stayed there for 8 years, and I did it. And I loved it. It was the most fantastic place to live. I would go down lumber, go to the Chinese, go Italian. It was a great community. And it was in that city that I learned a lot about the LGBT community, the artists, and I was very involved in that. Unfortunately, AIDS hit that city like no other city in the world. A lot of people who were not only suffering from openly gay community were suffering from AIDS, but there were people who have not come out, and they had to come out because of the illness. And I noticed a lot of my friends were dying of AIDS, and I realized that I didn't have the spiritual scaffolding to hold me together through that experience. And I remember standing at Union Square looking at one of the posts, and it said, Interweave, if you want to learn all about education and research for AIDS, please come to our meetings. And that was the first time I entered a UU hall. And it was amazing. I never seen people so committed to justice, to fairness. I was so impressed. And it was there when I began my child's journey. My child's tea, I will have a basket with teapots and cups and little cookie and I will visit my friends and new friends who were dying of AIDS. I moved to Amherst and Northampton. I decided to go back to school as an adult. And I ended up living in 2 remarkable towns in Massachusetts where the LGBT community as well were very active. But I did become officially a UU member to the Amherst and then eventually to the Northampton UU Church. And I was just amazed of the work that they did beyond what I was doing in San Francisco. And I became very active and very involved in things that interest me. And I learned a lot about how to be more courageous, how to be more resilient, and how to be a person with great dignity and respect in spite of your differences, in spite of who I am or they were, how we carry ourselves within those walls. Those things were a great example to me. Most importantly, the freedom I have to choose how I wanted to believe, whatever faith. There was such a richness. You have Buddhism, you have Judaism, you have Hinduism, you have Muslim. I loved it. I had never been exposed to any of these faiths, and I had a colorful bowl of fruit, of salad to choose from in terms of my spiritual life and how that I wanted to pave that. And I'm very grateful to this day. So, in my UU journey, besides finding out that lesbians do not come from Lebanon, I realized that the LGBT community is a rich nation with its with its own culture and history, that I happen to have been a privileged tourist and see how they really go about doing things in their community to fight for what they believe, to pursue their identity. That takes tremendous courage. And for me, it was a great example, because I too needed to fight for my identity and figure out how I was going to forge my way into this country. And now into this community here at Florida. Among you, I have learned so many things for the last 20 years that I have been in this congregation. I learned about nonviolence. I learned about peacemaking. I learned how to stay in relationship. I learned that it is more important to be right, to be in relationship than to be right. And that to me is absolutely priceless, because it has served me from every front of my life. So this past 7 years have been really challenging for me, spiritually, physically, and yet I know that I had a family here, and that I have people here that I could share my ups and downs, and which I have. I would be remiss if I don't mention the influence of Edward Kramer. He was the first Unitarian that I met from this area. I met him at Christmas Day at the Unitarians' friends in Sarasota, where I was staying. And here I am, 20-some years later, and with him and with all of you, I have grown exponentially, not only about the UU faith, but about myself and what I need to do as I continue this journey with all of you. And I have to say, I'm very grateful. I have a bear, colorful bear, and I have a hat. You all recognize me because I wear a hat. But that hat was kissed by a dear pet. Happens to be Laura Carroll, Linda Carroll's daughter. And also, the little bear was just given to me this week by a member of the LGBT community at CASA, who was just so grateful when I helped her in a translation in a particular difficult case. So here I am, LGTB, UU's Florida, UUC here, my friend. I am home, and for which I am so, so, so grateful. So with my heart in your hands, I thank you. Gracias.